Good evening to everyone. Now, as I think you know by now, this is a course on the Wisconsin idea. And the Wisconsin idea, as we've been exploring it, centers very heavily on university and state or governmental relations. And at the most general level, it rests on the view that knowledge and education from the university should redound to the benefit of the populace. Last week, Mr. Witkowski reviewed some of the proposals surrounding governmental efficiency. There were numbers of proposals that had been made, and these were forwarded to state government. These proposals were to enhance the level of state and local efficiency. Although support for greater professionalism in government had sprung from those analyses, Witkowski's own research showed that the effects were not uniformly positive across the citizenry. So these were to be developments that put in place would enhance the efficiency of government. And as you know, he focused very much at the local level. His work then leads to questions about whether proposed actions and changes spread as widely as sometimes it's assumed. Do we know what happens in terms of the kinds of efforts being made? And that prompted his call for people to undertake analyses that test actual conditions, not just to assume that things work in particular ways, but to undertake the underlying work to examine conditions. As we mentioned last week, his discussion centered very heavily on inclusion, in that case, inclusion of different populations in localities. Tonight's lecture continues the interest in inclusion. For Professor Ladson-Billings asks about the extent to which education extends to all segments of the population. There are echoes in her concerns from what Professors Brighouse and Hess shared with us. As you recall, they thought that education should benefit more than those who are enrolled in higher education. That was based on the kinds of assumptions, arguments made by early advocates of the Wisconsin idea. The outcomes from instruction, research, public service should spread widely. Performance at the pre-college level, then, falls within the sphere of higher education scholars, administrators, and others. In fact, there's almost nothing that's outside of the sphere when the fundamental interest is in the relationships to the larger populace. But Professor Ladson-Billings's reflections relate to a concern evident among the persons associated with the early formulation of the Wisconsin idea. Reportedly, Bascom and others were concerned with moral questions, questions related to ethical issues and to codes and standards of conduct. Ladson-Billings has approached this issue in the context of what she calls, in one of the articles that you were assigned, what she calls the moral debt. What is owed to those who have taken action on behalf of or experienced punishment because of their group membership? She says that there's a moral issue involved here, and we owe a debt to those who've taken moral stances. Among those to whom we are indebted, she identifies Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and the 6 million Jews whom the Holocaust exterminated. But she concludes that moral or ethical action is more than the responsibility of any single individual. She asks, that, or suggests that we should always ask, is it the equitable and just thing to do? For that's the hallmark of a democracy, really probing how just and right is an action. She suggests that the university represents a place potentially for interrogating the big questions, for asking about the common good and the nature of just and equitable communities. This helps explain in part why we've been paying a lot of attention to entire communities. To Ladson-Billings, then, it is the society and not just elements within it. The society warrants attention. There are consequences for those who are on the margins, but there are consequences as well for the entire society. You know, we've said periodically that a concern of this course is with democracy, but it's very much concerned with the question, how do we live together? That's the kind of moral, ethical kind of question. For we're asking, how can social connections be made broad and deep to strengthen democracy? These are pivotal questions for Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who is Professor Emerita in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. She has written extensively and has lectured just as extensively. In fact, I just learned that she just got back from a meeting. That's not at all unusual. But those extensive engagements have won her election to the presidency of the American Educational Research Association and to the National Academy of Education, and to her receiving 7 honorary degrees. She has written that the moral questions surrounding high-quality education for all might seem insurmountable, but she quotes Derek Bell, who has observed, just because something is impossible does not mean that it's not worth doing. And so, with that, we turn to Professor Ladson-Billings.
Thank you, Dr. Merritt. Good evening. All right, I'm Baptist, y'all, so I need you to talk back to me. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. So I'm going to try to do this as a seminar rather than a lecture. You know, professors, once you get us mic'd up, we have trouble shutting up. So not only am I going to try to do it as a seminar, I've actually put my timer on so that I make sure that I leave enough time for us to really engage in some back and forth. Dr. Merritt started out talking about the Wisconsin idea, and I'm actually one of those folks who went on what was called the Wisconsin Idea Seminar, where faculty and administrators go, and you have this week-long trip. And you go all around the state, and of course the motto or the slogan is, the Wisconsin idea is that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. Now we say the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the world, because our work is everywhere. If you end up in Washington State and need a transplant, that organ that you get is likely to come to you sitting in something called the Wisconsin Solution. So we developed that here, so it isn't like you have to get it in 2 hours. Your organ will be preserved for certain, a much more extended time. So Wisconsin is everywhere, and I will tell you, I've been to 6 of the 7 continents. I've never been anywhere where I haven't run into a badger. I'm walking on the beaches of West Africa, wearing my little Wisconsin shirt, and the resort owner says to me, "Are you from Wisconsin?" I said, "Well, yeah." "Madison?" I said, "Mm-hmm." He said, "I'm a badger." I'm like, you would be, right? Similarly, we were in Japan, we were in Tokyo. My daughter was wearing her Wisconsin hat, and somebody in the street wanted to buy the hat off her head because they, too, were Wisconsinites. I've getting the train from Charles de Gaulle to the metro part of Paris, and I had my little Bucky Badger backpack, and sure enough, the people sat across from me and they said, "Are you from Wisconsin?" I said, "Yeah." We love Wisconsin. So it is true that the boundaries of the university are really the boundaries of the world. We are everywhere. I'm going to talk tonight about this notion of the education of all the students in Wisconsin. I mentioned that I had been on the seminar as a participant, but a few years later, I was asked to come meet the seminar and talk about this work, and my colleague, Aiden Ball, who is here from the Department of Special Ed and Rehab Psych, went with me. So I got to present all the problems, and Aiden had solutions. So I haven't made him come here to do any work, and I appreciate his showing up. But once again, I'm going to be talking a lot about the problems that we are facing. So let's get started. So in general, Wisconsin is pretty good when it comes to education. This is called the Nation's Report Card, or NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. One of the things that I think is really confusing to the general public about test scores is you don't really know what tests they're using. This is the only test that tests people in every state and has like a standard score of this is, the national average, this is good, this is not good. When we do state testing, the advantage that states have is they can set their own cut scores. So it could be true that you take the same exact test, because we have test makers, we have people who produce these exams that sell these tests to all kinds of states. But what counts as passing in Texas might be failing in Colorado. So I like to look at NAEP data because it's the one test, besides, of course, college admissions like the ACTs and the SATs. But in terms of K-12 education, this is a test that looks at everybody. And they look at grades 4, 8, 11, and 25-year-olds. So we look across time. And so if you look at public school data, NAEP, reading in the nation is, the average in the nation is 221. Wisconsin's pretty close at 220. In math, the nation is at 239. Wisconsin is just above that. This is 2017 NAEP. In grade 8, we get better. And we are actually statistically better in reading and statistically better in mathematics. But that's the aggregate. We are testing fourth graders across the state. We are testing eighth graders. We are not disaggregating that data when they give this report. Now, I will tell you that NAEP does do the disaggregation. But this is what the state looks like in general. What if you look at black students? If you look at English language arts and mathematics, for white students, the proficiency rate is about 48.2%. So about half of them are seen as proficient. At math, it's better than half of the kids. 51.8% of the kids are seen as proficient. But look at the difference of black student performance in English language arts. 12.8 are proficient, and math, 11.6. So we are talking about this notion of a gap or disparity of 35 to 40% of the black kids in this state. This is a different exam now. This is not the NAEP test. This is the forward exam. And you can tell by that name forward that it's a Wisconsin exam, right? Because you like to name the test. I guess in Pennsylvania it's probably the Keystone exam. I'm originally from Philadelphia, so we probably do a Keystone exam. I'm going to assume that probably in Florida you take the Sunshine exam. I don't know. Oops, wrong way. the question also is, how do we compare with the rest of the nation? So again, we're going back to NAEP scores. The black-white disparity is what we're looking at here. So West Virginia has the lowest disparity between black and white students, 14 points. On average, there is a 26-point disparity between the performance of black and white students in the nation. But in Wisconsin, there's a 36-point disparity between black and white students. Again, it's why I like NAEP, because it looks at everybody using the same exam. So this huge disparity, and we are the worst. We're worse than Mississippi, Louisiana. We are the absolute worst in terms of disparity. So I started out with that first slide saying we're doing pretty good when you look in the aggregate. And in fact, if you just pull out the white students, we look really good. But when you begin to disaggregate the data, you see some other things happening. And this is how we compared in math. Again, West Virginia had the lowest disparity with 20 points. The national average is 33 points. In Wisconsin, the disparity between black and white students in mathematics is 43 points, the worst in the nation. And this is very embarrassing for me as a scholar, because I have to go around the country and I'm the one that has the worst scores, right? But I think there's a lot of things, and I hope in our Q&A we can begin to try to unpack why is this so. The nation knows we're the worst. So this is an article that was published some years ago, a report from the Annie E. Casey Foundation. It says that Wisconsin ranks as the worst state in the nation when it comes to racial disparities for children. It's the worst state in the country for opportunity for black children. So we're talking test scores, but what happens when you drill down is quality of life issues too. It's poverty, okay? It's home access. One of the boards that I sit on in the city is on the Urban League, and right now we're looking very carefully at housing. The average home ownership for blacks in America is 42%. 42% of black people across the country own a home. In Dane County, it's 17%. We don't have affordable housing. We just don't have it. And so when people have lower incomes, the likelihood that they can get into housing is very compromised. So as bad as Wisconsin is, things are particularly bad in Dane County. And you know, we like to think we're hot stuff. Come on, it's Madison, y'all, you know. If you look at child poverty in Dane County versus Wisconsin, this data is a little old, but it's still pretty much on trend. 46% of black folks in Dane County in 2006 were living in poverty. Look what happened by 2011. 3/4 of the black children in Dane County are poor. Look at the numbers here. I mean, these disparities are huge for across the state. We're worse than Milwaukee. So a lot of times we're going to point a finger at Milwaukee, but it turns out that we have really struggled to get black folks out of poverty in this county. The percent of black children living in poverty in Dane County has increased far more than poverty among white people. So if you look at 2005 and 7, 9% of whites were in poverty, whereas 35.7% of blacks. And then go down the list. So these are children. So these numbers are high. These numbers are high, but they include adults. They include those single adults who have no children. They include black folks like me who work at the university. They include black folks who work for the state but have no kids. Any way you slice it, though, the numbers are very bad. And what we know is graduation is tied to income. If you are in a low income family, it is less likely that you will graduate from high school. So we're looking at a couple cohorts that go from 2010 to 2013. And what you see is if you are not economically disadvantaged, you are likely to graduate. Take this last cohort, 90% of them graduated from high school. They have no economic disadvantage. 56% of these kids graduated, poor kids, graduated from high school in Madison. Where can you work in Madison without a high school graduation, a high school diploma? So no, you don't get into housing. No, you don't begin to get on this upward mobility trend. And again, I point out Madison's kind of worst of the worst. For the sake of time, we just looked at the gap, the white versus African American in Milwaukee. It's at 31.3%. And Racine is 29. Kenosha and Green Bay, 34 and 35. Madison, 50.6%. So we have a very serious issue of disparity. And of course, you can see it's not great for Latinx families either. That the schools are pretty much set up to continue to produce for high income white kids. They'll be just fine in our schools. There's a lot of stuff we do for them to make sure that everything comes out just right. I've spent a lot of time over the last 28 years in Madison schools, and one of the things I learned is that everything in Madison is important. Everything. Some years ago, they were talking about making a budget cut, and one of the things they wanted to cut was Latin 3. Now, before you think I'm hating on Latin 3, I took Latin 3, okay? It's actually when it starts getting good, it's Cicero, okay? But there were only 7 students in Latin 3 at West High. And when they said they were going to get rid of that class, the people who were advocating for it flew in. A gentleman by the name of Bradley Whitfield. He's an actor. He used to play in the West Wing. He was Josh. Bradley Whitfield was a graduate of West High, and he took Latin 3. So he came, and on Dayton Street, he stood in front of the school board and said, "You cannot get rid of Latin 3." And, attributed all of his success in life to Latin 3. Like, come on, boy, it's just Cicero. My point being that there are advocates for kids who are already well-positioned. In that same school where you had 7 kids in a regular-sized classroom, there were 42 English language learners in a room the size of a closet. So we bake into our system certain disparities. We are telling kids by the way we treat them who we value. Another thing that we try to measure is who's actually college ready. It's one thing to say you graduated. It's something else to say you are ready to go to college. One of the things that we work with a group of African American parents on Madison South Side, and we asked them, how many math courses do you have to take to graduate from Madison schools? They assumed it was 3 or 4. At that time, it was actually 2. And any kind of math, general math, all right? My former colleague, Walter Sakata, says we give these kids checkbook math and they'll never have a checkbook, all right? Now, if you are middle class, you don't need the school to tell you what your kid needs to take. You know that your kid needs to take 4 years of mathematics. You know that your kid needs to take 4 years of English and 4 years of science. But if you are working class and the school tells you, oh, you can graduate with this, this, and this, it's not unusual for you to follow those directions, but end up at the end with a diploma that really isn't worth very much in terms of post-secondary education. So you will see in this example, the ACT scores in the Midwest, Wisconsin's not bad, 20.5 compared to 20.3 in Ohio. Wish we had done that on Saturday, but let's not talk about that. Minnesota 21, Iowa 21, Illinois 23, Indiana. So we're in the 20s in the ACT. Now what does that mean? You are likely to be able to be successful in a UW class if you have 20 or better. And I know this because I spent 7 years on the athletic board, and I was your Big Ten faculty rep. And I know when we looked at a potential athlete, if they didn't have at least 19, we're like, we can't touch that kid because we don't have any remedial classes. Actually, we have one. We have one remedial class among the thousands of classes on this campus. It's a Math 99, right? It doesn't even count. You can take it, but you get no credit with the NCAA for having taken that because it's remedial. Ohio State has a whole slew of remedial classes. Illinois has remedial. We just don't have them. So out of a 36, we want to make sure that students have tested at least 19. Our rank among states that require the exam is first. We do very well on that. But if you look at what it looks like by ethnic group, our black students in 2017 were at 16.1, 15.8, popped up in in Wisconsin. You can see the numbers up a little bit better in the rest of the country. But 16.1 or 15.8, what I tell you was the score that we were looking for in athletics? 19. These people cannot be successful at the University of Wisconsin. It's not fair to them. We don't have any other courses to put them in that, they're going to compete with the rest of the students, and they will struggle. So one of our challenges is that we don't have students who are college ready. Another example of college readiness is not a great one, but the percentage of Madison students who are rated college ready, I'm going to probably go all the way over here. In mathematics, this is the percentage of black students who are college ready out of Madison. This is the percentage of Latino students who are college ready, and this is the percentage of white students who are college ready. Reading, you see a similar pattern. If you're not proficient in reading, college is going to be a problem because it's such a reading-dense enterprise. There's also discipline disparity. I apologize for the fuzziness of this, but what I can tell you is that, let's start here. The overall demographics, 19% of Madison school, the Madison Metropolitan School District is African American. Okay? 21% is Hispanic Latino. 42% of the district is white. But from 2015 to 2018, look how many black children are suspended. 61.9, 63, 62. The discipline disparity, and this is actually my friend Aiden's area of expertise, so if I say something wrong, you can correct me. But here's what we know. When you look at why the kids are being suspended, there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of arbitrariness. Better than half of these suspensions are for what we call non-contact violations. So when I go out to schools across the country, one of the first questions that I ask them is, how many of your schools have a hat rule? Almost all of them. Then my second question is, why? And almost no one can give me a real coherent reason. Here's the typical response. Oh, those hats represent gang behavior. Okay, well, apparently at the University of Wisconsin, I'm just working with gang members. Because I haven't seen anybody's eyes in like 4 years. I mean, everybody got a hat on. This notion that it's something wrong with something so innocuous as a hat. When I talk to the kids about the hat rule, this is what they tell me. We don't have a problem with the school having a hat rule. We have a problem with the way in which they apply the hat rule. White students don't get detained or suspended for wearing their hat. They might get told, take your hat off, but that's the end of it. We end up in detentions and in suspensions over a hat. Many years ago, I believe it was Cherokee Middle School, and it's funny because we're right in the midst of this, talking this zero tolerance again. The school district had a zero tolerance policy about weapons. Now, I get that. But you still have to use discretion. So here was a kid who had a knife, but he was having a birthday, and he brought a cake. But he had a knife to cut the cake. So he was expelled, because that's what the rule says. If you come with a weapon, you must be expelled. Fortunately for him, he was white and middle class. And his parents didn't go through the regular disciplinary procedure. They called their lawyer. And they had a hearing. And they won the hearing. But what struck me is the reporting of this incident in the Wisconsin State Journal was, here's the headline read, honor student expelled for a weapon. And I said to my students, you can't get killed by an honor student? I didn't know that. I mean, it's like, gee, I would just hang with honor students then. The perception that certain kids are always in the right is what we're up against when we begin to look at these discipline disparities. This is from 2013. This is actually the demographics in there, and I checked, and they're actually pretty similar. So about 42 to 43% of the kids in the district are white. Somewhere between 19 and 20 are African American. Somewhere about 20-some% are Latinx. A much smaller percentage are 2 or more races, and then you have another percentage of the kids who are of Asian descent. That's what the kids look like in the schools. But this is what the behavioral referrals look like. So that 20% of African Americans, this is them in terms of referral for behavior. This inequity and asymmetry around how we perceive these youngsters, who they are and how we treat them, contributes to all these other things we've been talking about. And it begins very early, so I'm going to show this video. I hope it works.
Can you rhyme? So if I say cat,
in the hat.
4-year-old JJ and his 3-year-old brother Joa are doing what children their age do. Running and playing 1 minute, pushing the next. When they act up at home, they are disciplined.
I think that they're typical 4 and 3-year-olds.
But at school?
He's been suspended about 5 times.
At 3?
At 3. And I can't make this up. I wish I was. He hit one of the teachers on the arm and they sent him home. And they said that they considered that hitting to be a danger to the staff.
The most recent report says 7,500 children nationwide were suspended at least once from public preschool. Yes, preschool. The alarming numbers reported by the Department of Education also say black students are being suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white kids across all grades.
We know there is a correlation between doing out-of-school suspensions and expulsions and ultimately locking kids up. For far too many children and communities, the school-to-prison pipeline is real. And the fact that it starts as young as 4, again, simply isn't good enough.
In Los Angeles, America's second largest school district, Superintendent John Dacey finds the trend disturbing. Why are these numbers playing out this way?
Ma'am, I think they're the same biases that are in society. And so I think this is a reflection of the growth we have yet to do in this country around these issues.
What shocked him? The reason. The majority of suspensions in his district were for something called willful defiance.
It was things like failure to do homework, failure to bring your notebook to class. That's not willful defiance, that's adolescence.
A year ago, the district became the first in the nation to remove willful defiance as a reason for suspensions, and the numbers have dropped ever since. 3 years ago, there were 19,000 suspensions. This year, 8,000. The teachers' union never took a stance on the issue, with some teachers saying willful defiance has been abused, and others saying it takes an important disciplinary tool away from their classrooms.
I teach my kids all the time, education is your passport.
Jeanette Powell learned that the hard way. Long before her sons were born, she was labeled a troublemaker. As the daughter of a drug-addicted father, she struggled in school and life.
I was expelled from school when I was 3 years old, in preschool. And when I first got the phone call about JJ, I immediately thought back to that. You know, at a young age, I was told that I was a bad kid in school.
Jeanette proved them wrong, eventually got her college degree, wrote a book, and became an accomplished public speaker, even giving a TED Talk.
Get behind the line.
The Powells have worked hard to make a good life for their children.
My biggest fear is that they'll be labeled and that they'll believe it.
Every day, she fights to inspire her boys, more a preschool to pre-med mentality.
Go! Go, Joa! Go, Joa! Go, Joa!
Than preschool to prison. Sarah Seidner, CNN, Omaha.
I actually had an opportunity to be on a panel with Mrs. Powell. The good news is Mrs. Powell actually is now a PhD candidate at UCLA. They have a third child, and everybody's doing fine. But she had to take those kids out of public school in order for them to do fine. I'm just shocked that people haven't figured out basic human development. There's one thing that a 3-year-old wants: to be home with mom. And if yelling, screaming, even hitting somebody is going to get that for you, guess what? That's what they're going to do. Someone who knows anything about human development would say to a 3-year-old, I know you want to be home. Guess what? I want to be home too. But we both have to be here. And there really isn't anything you can do to go home until it's time to go home. So let's enjoy this. To really just have kids understand they don't have a way to get their way when they're supposed to be in school. But I want to say that it really could be different, and I'm going to share this with you.
When I first saw the acceptance letter, I was very excited.
When I was taking it out of my box, I was like, yay, I finally made it. I'm the first to actually go to college in my family. Because I'm the first in my family to go. I'm the first one to graduate high school. So there were so many emotions that came to me. I was nervous and excited. Everything that we had worked towards just felt tangible in that moment. Just like a dream come true for me.
Our moment to make our dreams come true.
This is what I've been waiting for. My gosh, I'm actually going to college.
I kind of teared up. I cried, my mom cried.
My dad's always been a very pretty serious guy, and he burst into tears and he gave me a hug and he said, Ryan, you have no idea how proud I am of you.
It was awesome.
Mind-blowing. So I want to go to college to make my parents proud.
College has been a deferred dream for almost everyone in my family.
It's for me, that's one. For my mom.
I want to be able to make better decisions for myself and hopefully change my family dynamic.
Kind of set an example for my younger siblings. I want to go to college because it's an opportunity that my parents didn't have.
Family members around me have just continued to tell me I'm so proud of you, I really want you to go.
And I want to go to college because I know it's the only way I'm going to be able to live the life that I want to live.
Now I can finally pursue my love for engineering and computer science.
come back to my community and be a leader here.
Eastside has definitely helped me feel more comfortable in my skills.
I've learned to have a lot of confidence in myself.
Being confident, stand up for myself, or like go to teachers when I need help.
Asking teachers for help.
Communication skills.
Communication is important.
I think resilience.
Always like having a balance.
I have to take myself to class and I have to do my own homework and I need to schedule my own time.
Time management is key.
Time management is the big thing that I learned here from Eastside.
You have to be dedicated to your work.
Managing a lot of work at once.
Well, living in the dorms, I think it's helped me to learn to live away from home.
The level of the writing classes that we had.
Just working hard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've learned a lot of things here, but I think one is just staying focused.
I'm up for the challenge and I have all the tools I need to be successful. Thank you.
So I like to use this school as an example of possibility. It is located in the lowest income community in the San Francisco Bay Area. My fear, however, because I just left there this weekend, is it's falling prey to gentrification. And so people are not staying in East Palo Alto. When I lived in California, it was almost an exclusively all Black and Latinx school district. This particular school is, quote, private. It spun out from a young man that I met as a Stanford student. He did his senior honors thesis on why can't Black children have good schools in their own communities? Because what we had happening in East Palo Alto, there was no high school. They closed the high school. So all the kids were required to go as a part of a desegregation plan into other communities and didn't really feel a part of those communities. They were bused there. They had trouble participating in extracurricular because you have to have transportation to get home from practice, those kinds of things. So he opened up this high school with 8 kids. Now, he didn't just do that first. He had that senior honors thesis, and he started out being a regular teacher in the high school, but seeing kids fail miserably. And what wasn't computing for him is that he was a community AAU basketball coach. He says, I know these kids are smart. I mean, these kids blow my mind how smart they are. Why are they failing out of school? So he dusted off that senior honors thesis and turned it into a business plan and shopped it throughout Silicon Valley to all of these Apple, Intel, Microsoft, all these companies, and said, you know, you want to make a difference in the community, this is how you can do it. He started with 8 students. Right now, they have about 350 kids. The kids have 2 choices for their curriculum: college prep and college prep advanced. The difference between the two is that in the college prep advanced, you will get through the entire calculus sequence. He started it out as a high school, saw kids had a lot of deficiencies, and so he's expanded it. It's now a middle to high school. His students, some of his kids are so poor that they have nowhere to live. So now he has a dorm. And their goal is to get these kids into 4-year schools. He says, we don't even look at community colleges. I know community colleges could be an option. But what we see is that kids who are struggling, if they go to a community college, they don't go any further. They're often not encouraged to do the liberal arts transfer, but rather some certificate program for a job that may or may not exist. He's gotten so good at this. They've done this for 24 years now. He's gotten so good at it that for commencement, they don't actually have to go get any fancy speakers. They just get a graduate and bring one of their alums back. The other thing that they now do, which I think is really important, is they require the kids to do some community service. It's like you also have to give back. The cost of educating a kid at Eastside Prep is $14,000 a year. Nobody pays tuition. Their endowment is close to $20 million. They pay their teachers, what Palo Alto and Menlo Park and Los Altos and those surrounding communities pay their teachers. So it's just been a joy to kind of watch what they do. They have a long school day. School day starts from 8, it ends about 5. All kids have a tutorial. I don't care who you are, you must have a tutorial. When I asked, well, why are you putting everybody in a tutorial, his response is everybody could be better at something. So it doesn't become a stigma. Oh, you have to go to tutorial. No, we all got to go to tutorial. And they have a fabulous basketball program, which is why kids come to school. They do not come to school for algebra trig. I'm sorry to tell you this. They come to school for stuff they're interested in. So they have a wonderful writing program, and they keep winning the student newspaper award, beating out very wealthy districts. They have a great basketball program and have a wonderful photography program. So it's not just the grind. One of my favorite things about the school is as a senior, you must take something called an SRI, a Senior Research Institute. Apple Computer supplies all seniors with a laptop. And they have to find a problem to look at, to research. And they have to present their research to an audience, and in that audience, there must be at least 2 experts. So I have come to the SRI, and I heard an SRI on the high rate of HIV/AIDS in Black and Latinx communities. And sitting in the audience were 2 AIDS researchers from Stanford. I saw another SRI on criminal justice and the problem of incarceration in San Mateo County. And the San Mateo DA was in that SRI. I saw one on educational disparity, and my colleague, Linda Darling-Hammond, who was currently the president of the California School Board, Stanford faculty person, was in that SRI. So the kids have to do real work. I want to show you an example of, let's see. Here's a kid who is currently in school there. He's in the class of 2022. And he says, I wanted to come here because I'd never gone to an all-minority school where kids do well. But I was surprised to find such a strong community. Nobody gets left behind at Eastside. In the classroom, teachers make sure you really understand something before moving on, and students will help each other in the dorms. I think I'll be able to grow more confident in who I am here. Let's see. And hopefully my thing is hot enough to show you. Yes. Nope. All right. Yes.
I teach 10th grade American literature. We study a wide range of American literature, from the more traditional canon to a lot of authors of color. So I might use a novel or might use a poem as the content, but the real goal is to get students to think critically, to question the text that's on the page, to question the author who produced it. We really try to ask the question and complicate the question of what it means to be an American, which is an interesting question for a lot of our students who come from immigrant families. And Eastside's played a huge role in helping to make East Palo Alto a place that's known for students who love going to school.
Oh, he's got a hat on. Oh my God, we're all scared.
I believe that every single student can learn, can rise to higher expectations. And that's something that I'm grateful that all of my colleagues here at Eastside also value. That we want the best for each of our students, that we believe they can do it, and that we will help them with the tools to get there.
Let's see. So, this was in the Stanford Daily last week. High school founded by Stanford grads for first-gen college students enters 24th year. Can I tell you, in those 24 years, they have had 100% high school graduation and 100% college attendance. That's their goal. They've decided that whoever walks through the door is entitled to the best education we can give them. That is unfortunately not what students are hearing in public schools across this country. They are hearing over and over, you're going to make it, you won't make it. And we have a mindset that only certain kids can go. My question always becomes, who gets to decide that? I did a presentation for Leadership Greater Madison some years ago, and I shared with them a transcript of a youngster from West High School. Name was redacted. She had a transcript. I think her grade point was like 3.4. She had on that transcript stuff that everybody recognized. 4 years of English, 4 years of Spanish, 4 years of mathematics, 4 years of science, 4 years of social studies, some elective courses, and physical education. Then I put up a transcript of one of her classmates. Again, name redacted, but he happened to be an African-American male. Interestingly, he also had a 3.4. But once you got past his freshman year, his courses were unrecognizable. He was taking work experience, community outreach. I mean, I've been reading transcripts for a long time. And I'm saying, what is this? One of the people in the audience said, well, you know, he could go to MATC. And I said, you're absolutely right. But I put her transcript back up and I said, are you saying that she can't go to MATC? Oh, well, yeah, she could go to MATC, so she can go to both MATC and UW. How come she gets 2 choices and he gets 1? Who gets to make these decisions? So those are the things that I think we are challenged by. Schools get mad at me because I tell parents all the time, make sure your child takes at least 1 advanced placement class. You are paying taxes too. And with the exception of categorical classes like special education or bilingual education, your youngster is allowed to take anything the school offers. What I often get back is, oh, the teacher didn't recommend it. I don't care what the teacher recommended. You have a right to say, I'd like my son or my daughter to take advanced placement English. Oh, well, the teacher said he won't get a good grade. He's not taking it for the grade. It's supposed to be a really good course. I would rather him have a C in advanced placement than an A in some basic grammar class. The quality of what kids are exposed to really shows up over and over, that even in the same building, there are multiple schools. There is a school for those kids who are headed to college. There is a school for those kids who likely will go maybe to the technical college. And there's a school for the kids that we don't know what's going to happen to them. Maybe they'll join the armed services. Maybe someone will hire them in a convenience store. That kind of inequity is baked into our system. And until we decide this is what we want for all of our kids, if they're going to participate in this thing called democracy, if they're going to make enough money so that their own children don't fall in this continuing cycle of poverty, then the school can be a democratizing force. But the way it is currently organized and the way we are currently operating, it is just reproducing the inequities that we are seeing in the larger society. So I'm actually stopping when I said I was going to stop, because I want to answer your questions.
I don't think there's anything I can say with what Professor Ladson-Billings has talked about. I see there's some questions already. I do want to come back to the comment I made earlier, where her whole notion is that there is responsibility for everybody. And it is not, and this is not just an issue to be examined by those on the margins, because these have the implications for the kind of society, the kinds of operations we want to see in our nation and, in fact, in the world. But with that, I think I saw a question over here first.
I know another school where people love to go.
Mhm.
It's called Odyssey.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with that?
Mhm.
So
I've actually recommended some people to the Odyssey program. Yes.
They love to be there.
Yes. Yes.
And they are people whose only qualification is a high school degree.
Right. And actually, one of the things we're doing at Odyssey is we're starting to pick up the kids of those students so that they have an Odyssey-like experience and realize, oh, wow, I should be ready to do this kind of work too. So
how can we get teachers like Emily Auerbach and Wisconsin Academy?
You know, I think a big part of our challenge is mindset. The sense that we've grown comfortable with the notion that only certain people can do X. You know, one of the real pleasures of having been a university professor for so long at such a great university is that it's afforded me the opportunity to travel the world and see education systems in other places. In Japan, I was shocked at how much time the teacher invests in the kids who are struggling. We do the opposite. We put our time into the stars and then expect that these kids who are struggling will somehow catch up. We might put them with an instructional aid, but we don't really invest in them in the same way. Our sense is that either you have it or you don't. I taught social studies in Philadelphia schools for 10 years. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat down at a parent-teacher conference with a kid who was struggling and heard this. Well, you know, I was never any good at history. And I really wanted to say, but I didn't because I needed to keep the job. I'm not trying to teach you. The sense that it's innate or it's inherited is a very American way of seeing things. Whereas when we were in Japan, we heard over and over, well, if you're not doing well, then you got to just put more effort in it. That there was no sense that there's a limitation. That the human brain is malleable. And there are ways in which you can learn. You might learn at a different rate. You might learn with a different approach. But you can learn. And we are very, very quick to just foreshorten kids in certain things. No, you shouldn't take any more mathematics. That's not for you. And I don't think the university gets off the hook on this one either. We actually have some courses that can clearly be determined as readout courses. No, we don't want you to go any further. So we make it very difficult for you to pass. I worked with a young lady from Racine, and she said, you know, I came here as an honor student, and I'm doing great in everything but this particular science class. And what I did is I sent out an all-call to my students who were science educators. And I said, does anybody know anything about this course? Because I have a young woman who was basically failing, and she's never failed anything in her life. We had about 3 responses that said, it's not your student. It's the way they teach that course. And one of them volunteered to meet with her and work with her. She passed the class. So there's some things that we are doing to create this kind of streamlined pipeline to say only certain people can go so far. When my daughter was a student here, she started out being very interested in computer sciences. And the chair of computer sciences was excited because here you have an African-American female wanting to do computer sciences. And she said to me, tell her to please hold on. The first 2 courses are awful. But if she can get past them, she'll be just fine. I'm like, you know they're awful? It's okay for you to know that they're awful? What's the point? And sure enough, they were awful. And my daughter is like, no, not doing that, you know. She's smart. She took something else and did just fine. But the idea that we have designed education systems that will not serve everyone in a democracy.
As citizens of Madison, we have an opportunity to hear from prospective superintendents coming into the school district, there are some meetings that are going to be held, and they're hoping that there will be lots of public input and listening of who these candidates are. I want to know, what are some of the qualities as citizens that we should look for the leaders of our school district?
So, I mean, for me, the easiest thing to do is to present candidates for the superintendency with the data. We can't say we're happy with this data. So my question is, it's not a hypothetical question. My question is, these are the data for Madison. What do you want to do about these data? Plain and simple. I don't want any pie in the sky hypothetical. I want to look at the data that that person will be confronted with and what's their plan to be able to change those outcomes. I'm not Pollyannish. I don't believe that no one will ever fail. My concern is that the failure is so predictable, okay? If it were more random and it turns out, oh, you get these kids over here struggling and these struggling and these struggling, or all of these kids are doing well, but you cannot predict it by where they live and what they look like. But right now we can. We just need to know their zip code, and we can tell you how well they're doing. And that shouldn't be. No.
Hi. I used to work inclusion in the Madison schools, and I was just wondering how you felt about kids having like early diagnosis of like unspecified behavioral disorders.
If you create a category, we will fill it. Lucky me, they did not have ADHD as a category when I was a kid. Because I'd have been in that category. Because I was like, oh, this look interesting. Oh, no, let's do this. Oh. So we create these categories, and then we fill them. We create prisons, and then we fill them. So to the degree that we want to categorize youngsters, we are going to continue to give kids a label, like the woman in the video. There's nothing wrong with her kids. I sat in an interview with her, and the youngest child sat beside her, and he sat as quiet as a mouse an hour interview. He didn't move. So we've got to begin to understand that it is important that we don't decide before people even get started that they're failing. I've been in classrooms and seen the disparity. I was in a classroom once observing a student teacher, and a little white kid got up out of his seat 9 times. This is second grade. 9 times. And each time she said, "Sit down, Stanley. Go back to your seat, Stanley. Come on, Stanley, I'm not playing. Sit down." 9 times. After his 9th time, a black child got up and she said, "You're out of here." Now, when I sat down to confer with her, and I'm like literally just documenting, I got the times and what the teacher does and what kids do, she was shocked. Now, I guess Jennifer Erpenbach will call that implicit bias. But I have a problem with implicit bias as a catch-all, because the outcomes are still the same. We all have implicit bias. We're not all allowed to act on it. And that's my challenge, to keep hearing, I know implicit bias is a thing. But when it becomes a default position of teachers, when it becomes a default position of law enforcement, I just shot him because I had implicit bias. No. So I guess what I'm, to get back at your question is, we need to stop creating these categories of exclusion and say we have a responsibility for every youngster who enters the schoolhouse doors. Those parents don't get to pay less taxes. They don't get to say, oh, well, I don't really want to be successful, so I'm only going to pay half of this. They are taxed at the same rate as everybody else. And so they're entitled to what everyone else is. Now, I know that we have, there's an interesting phenomenon happening in Madison right now. There is white flight. I think you guys know that. If white people will stay in Madison as dual income, no children. They'll live downtown, in these beautiful condos and what have you. But when they decide to have a family, they're heading to Middleton and Verona and to Oregon. But I have news for them. So are we. So are we. There's really no place to go from the explosion of racial and ethnic diversity. What I see in Madison today, so different from 28 years ago. And so you cannot outrun the demographics. The real issue is, what are we going to do to ensure that all of our kids actually benefit from having been in this school? What's interesting to me is that the most elite colleges in the country are the most diverse. Stanford has a white population of about 43%. Harvard is about 44%. That they are looking for the best of the best no matter what they look like. And somehow, here we are in Wisconsin, we are the next to the last in the Big Ten, which is, if you hadn't looked, is now 14, which makes no sense to me. I don't know who's doing this math. I was happy when it was 11. When 10 was 11, I was good with that. But there's only one school that is whiter than us, and that's Nebraska. And it is Nebraska. It's Lincoln. It's not even Omaha. It's Lincoln, right? So we got to do better. And I think, I had John Wiley come and speak to some students some years ago. And John, he's a strict scientist, but I love him because John says, look, he told students, he said, if I flip a coin 13 times and I get heads, what's the likelihood? What's the probability that if I flip it a 14th time, it'll be heads? 50%. The students all got that. So he said, in a state that has better than 80% white population, if you just throw a dart to pick a student, what's the likelihood that that student is going to be white? 80+%. So he says that's why diversity has to actually be managed. You can't just say randomly, oh, we hope we get these kids. It doesn't operate that way. So unless we become more deliberate and focused on being a much more inclusive university, we're going to keep producing what we produce. School of Education, we have very few potential teachers of color. Number is very, very low. And that's not different in most of these big universities. I do know that years ago, the Illinois chancellor decided that he wanted 500 black students in the freshman class. That was in like the late 1960s, early 70s. He ended up with almost 700. And I've met some of these people who have gone on to really good careers, and they'll say, oh, I'm one of the 500. Actually, it's like 700, but they call themselves the 500. But it was a deliberate attempt to diversify that campus. That's the kind of work that I think we have to do. You got a hand back here?
I'm a practicum student in a Madison public school, and I guess I see a lot of the disparities in discipline, physical contact, and I just see these things manifesting every day. And I'm curious if you have observations of best practices for either policy or interventions, or even just ways I, as a bystander, can what works? Yeah.
I mean, I think the challenge is to recognize the full humanity of these young people. a lot of times we don't think that they're entitled to fair treatment. We make assumptions about them. I often give this example of my daughter when she was third grade maybe, and she's one of these very hard to get up in the morning kids when she was a little girl, mostly because she was hard to put to bed the night before. I think there's a correlation there. And so every morning we're rushing to school at the last minute. She got a piece of bagel in her hand and she's got papers, spewing out of her backpack. But because of who I am in this community, no one will be disparaging towards my daughter rushing in at the last minute. But my research site is on the other side of town, on the east side, in a more modest community. And I saw mothers dropping off their kids, same thing. Kids rushing in the last minute, piece of toast in their hand, papers all over the place. What those mothers didn't know, though, is that inside that school, this is what I heard. Well, if those people actually cared about education, they would get their kids here on time. So that mother and we're doing the exact same thing. Trying to get our kids to school on time, rushing. But because of who I am, my kid gets a pass. Because these are lower income folks. What's being placed on them is that they don't care about education. So I think we have incredible work to do around the attitudes of the adults who interact with kids. And I think we also have to hold up some mirrors and let people see what they're actually doing. Because people will say, oh, I'm not doing that. It's just like the sit down Stanley. That woman never thought she was doing anything different until I showed her. You put this kid out the first time he got up. You let this other kid have nine chances. So until people can actually see what they're doing, I think it's very difficult to get them to change it. Probably have time for one more question, or no?
Yeah, thank you, of course, again for this presentation. It definitely hit home to myself, as I would definitely identify as one of those students. I had the opportunity to attend 3 different high schools. Madison's my 3rd college. I went to community college before this. And just really assessing, of course, educational disparity. It's funny how my next opportunity is me being a student, a core member for Teach for America, and realizing just the different plethora of resources that I've accumulated and just witnessing how I can use that, and witnessing, of course, within this course, within the Wisconsin Idea, talking about democracy and looking at our school giant gap within disparities for demographics. I can't fathom but pay attention to recently, like student protests that occurred last week, and thinking about the 1969 demands within a Black student strike, but also paying attention to last year when the university implemented the Bucky Promise program. And one initiative where I was looking at where we can implement policies that's already in place is utilize that resource of targeting minorities, of course, within the state. If we want to say, of course, the university is the boundaries of within the state and also within the world, but utilize that essentially to put that reflection in that place. And I definitely want to know more within your help in essentially policy that I can possibly do, where I know faculty is willing, of course, to work with students like myself, but I would definitely want to make sure this is accurate.
Well, and I think a big challenge we have is changing narratives. You know, when you talk about the state of Wisconsin, you say Milwaukee, everybody goes, right? Wisconsin has 5 exemplary high schools in the state. 5. None of them is in Madison. 2 are in Milwaukee. Rufus King, Ronald Reagan. 3rd one is Middleton High School. That's the closest one to us. So we have a narrative that, that is terrible over there in Milwaukee. It turns out that many of the Black students who come here from Milwaukee have either come from private school, Rufus King, or Ronald Reagan, those 3 schools. Or they're part of the 220 program and they went out to Brookfield, Whitefish Bay, or Brown Deer. So the bigger question is, how are we going to ensure that all of these kids get a fair shake? All of these parents are paying Wisconsin taxes. All of these families, are part of this state. How do we make sure that they get to take advantage of one of the state's best resources, and that is this land grant flagship campus. I know it's getting, I'm running out of time here, but I have a friend from Illinois, and he told me once, at the University of Illinois, he said, you know, Gloria, the people in Illinois don't love Illinois like the people in Wisconsin love the University of Wisconsin. He said, we're the third choice of most of our students. First choice is Northwestern. The second one is University of Chicago. They flip back and forth. He said that's why it's like a ghost town down here on the weekend, because everybody goes back to the North Shore suburbs. He said, in fact, the most loved university in Illinois ain't even in Illinois. It's in South Bend, Indiana. But people love this university. I don't care. You can go to Rhinelander. You can go to, the Apostle Islands. I don't care where you go in this state. Everybody's a Badger. And with that level of pride, we should want it to be much more representative of everybody in here. I'll end with what Cora kind of ended with in my introduction, and I'm ever hopeful, like Derek Bell, that just because something is impossible doesn't mean it's not worth doing. Thank you.